At first glance, the premise of this disaster almost sounds like a joke, right? Like something straight out of a Saturday morning cartoon. But I assure you, the reality of what we're unpacking in today's explainer was absolutely terrifying. We're going back over a century to examine an event that pivoted, literally in a matter of seconds, from a seemingly ridiculous concept into a devastating, very real nightmare for an entire neighborhood. So I want you to really put yourself in this scene for a second. Imagine you're walking down the snowy cobblestone streets of Boston. It's the winter of 1919. It's freezing out, you're just going about your day, and then, suddenly, a towering 50-foot wave comes violently crashing towards you, completely blotting out the sky. Just think about that number, 50 feet. That is the height of a 5-story building tearing through a dense city block. But here is where this story shifts from your typical natural disaster into something entirely unprecedented. Because that 50-foot wave bearing down on the streets of Boston, it wasn't made of water. It wasn't made of mud. It was millions of gallons of thick, sticky, suffocating molasses. When this enormous wave struck, it didn't just wash people away. It engulfed them. Because of the sheer viscosity of this stuff, people were trapped with literally no escape. Section 1, the 2 million-gallon threat. So, to understand how something this unimaginable could even happen, we have to look at the source. The setting is Boston's North End. It's a bustling, freezing, working-class neighborhood, totally blanketed in snow. But towering ominously over those homes and cobblestone streets was a massive steel tank. And we aren't talking about your standard industrial barrel here. This enormous structure held over 2 million gallons of dense, heavy molasses. Back then, this massive reserve was used mostly for manufacturing alcohol and producing different industrial products. 2 million gallons, just suspended right above a populated neighborhood. Now, this disaster didn't just come completely out of nowhere. There were definitely ominous warning signs. Locals had deep concerns because, well, the tank leaked constantly. It leaked so much that it was just a normalized part of daily life. Neighborhood kids would actually bring little cans to the base of the structure to collect the dripping molasses for themselves. And worse, locals reported hearing these strange groaning noises echoing from inside the steel. But despite those absolutely terrifying red flags, nobody realized that a catastrophic failure was only days away. Section 2, a 35-mile-per-hour tidal wave. That lingering dread hanging over the North End finally reached its breaking point on January 15, 1919. The rupture was sudden, it was explosive, and it was incredibly violent. When the steel finally gave way, eyewitnesses didn't just describe a loud crash. No, they reported a sound that was far more terrifying. They said it sounded like machine gun fire. That was the sound of thousands of massive steel rivets violently popping and tearing apart all at once as the structural integrity of this giant tank just completely failed. And once that steel tore open, the molasses didn't just spill out. It erupted. A massive wave of dark syrup rushed through the streets at nearly 35 miles per hour. Just think about the physics of that for a second. A dense, heavy liquid moving at 35 miles per hour. That leaves absolutely zero time to react. You literally cannot outrun it. The resulting chaos was truly unbelievable. This wasn't just a flood. It was more like blunt force trauma to the entire neighborhood. The sheer weight and speed of this wave crushed entire buildings right down to their foundations. Heavy horse-drawn wagons were just casually flipped over like they were kids' toys. People walking down the street were literally thrown into the air by the impact. And those who weren't crushed by the debris, they found themselves trapped, completely immobilized in the rising, sticky flood. Section 3, the Sticky Rescue Operation. The immediate aftermath was just a scene of total devastation. As the freezing winter air hit the steaming syrup, heroic first responders, firefighters, police officers, sailors stationed nearby, they rushed headfirst into the disaster zone to try and save whoever they could. But they faced a horrifying logistical nightmare. See, in a normal water flood, a rescue team can wade or swim through the current to reach victims. But in this molasses flood, the syrup was so thick, so dense, and so utterly sticky that it made it nearly impossible to move. Both the struggling victims and the horses trapped in the deluge found that the harder they fought to escape, the more exhausted and stuck they became. And despite the desperate, really frantic efforts of those rescue teams working around the clock in the freezing cold, the toll of this disaster was heartbreaking. Ultimately, 21 people lost their lives. They were either crushed by the collapsing buildings and flying debris, or they suffocated, trapped right beneath the thick, dark surface of the syrup. In addition to those tragic fatalities, the multi-day rescue operation eventually revealed that more than 150 people were injured. The sheer volume of casualties required days of grueling, exhausting labor from the rescue teams. Honestly, just to pull survivors from the wreckage and clear that suffocating sludge from the streets of the North End was a massive undertaking. Section 4. Corporate Negligence on China. As the syrup was eventually washed away and the victims were laid to rest, the city's shock quickly and rightfully turned to anger. Officials immediately pointed the finger at the company that owned the tank. An official investigation was launched to find out exactly how a 2 million gallon steel tank was allowed to rupture in the middle of a major American city. Well, the engineering investigation uncovered a series of shocking, undeniable problems. First, the tank had been incredibly poorly built from the very beginning. It lacked the basic structural integrity required to hold anywhere near that much weight. Second, proper safety tests on the structure had never actually been conducted. And third, perhaps most damning of all, the owners had completely ignored the obvious warning signs. Remember the constant leaking we talked about, the strange groaning noises, the kids collecting drips in cans? The company knew about all of these issues, and they did absolutely nothing. This disaster was entirely preventable. And because of those damning engineering findings, the aftermath of the explosion actually evolved into something historically significant. It became one of America's very first major corporate negligence cases. This bizarre, terrifying event set a landmark legal precedent, holding a powerful corporation legally and financially accountable for the devastating consequences of ignoring public safety. Section 5. A lingering century-old scent. Even after the trials concluded, the settlements were paid out, and the city of Boston physically rebuilt the North End, the ghost of this disaster never truly left the neighborhood. We're now more than a century removed from January 15, 1919, but the legacy of the Great Molasses Flood definitely still echoes through the streets. In fact, there's a local anecdote that's survived for over 100 years now. Even today, long after the cobblestones were scrubbed clean and the neighborhood was modernized, some locals claim that when the weather is just right, specifically on really hot, humid summer days, you can still smell the faint, sweet, dark scent of molasses rising up from the streets of the North End. It's a ghostly reminder of the 2 million gallons that forever changed the city. It really is a story that challenges our basic understanding of what a disaster even looks like, which leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling thought to ponder today. If you were walking down your own street right now, and you looked up to see a massive 50-foot wave rushing towards you, would you ever, in your wildest nightmares, imagine it could be syrup? Thank you for joining me for today's explainer to explore this incredible piece of history. Until next time, keep questioning the world around you.